So I'm going to start with two admissions. The first is a realization as well as an admission, which is that I'm old. And I sat there in the audience for the first two talks, which I thought were fantastic, realizing that I really am old now. I have sitting there thinking all the times throughout my career, and I've been doing this stuff for 25 plus years now, when I wished I'd known some of the things that we had Nova tell us about, some of the tools for burnout. I've burned out, use the tools Nova give you, and I wish I had been more aware of many of the things that Liam talked us through as well, around that design is a power dynamic, and you have to think of it such. So number one, I'm old. Number two, I'm not a designer. I've never been a designer. You would never want me to design anything. I'm not joking. I'm not doing the English thing. I really am serious. I'm not a designer. What I am is someone who creates conditions for design to help institutions that matter make the world a little bit better. What I do is create space for design to do good for the world. And I want to talk you through some work we did in the UK government about trying to do that. I would normally have an actual designer with me. This gentleman here, Ben, he's an actual designer by appointment from the Queen, no less. But sadly, he's got COVID. So I'm going to be channeling Ben periodically in, and hopefully you'll get a sense of his voice as we go through this, the authentic designer voice rather than the, faker like me. So I want to give you a fresh perspective on what makes a good design system. I don't want to be rude about anyone, but I want to hopefully make you think slightly differently about design systems. That's my objective. And everyone loves a design system. They're so cool. They've become really cool. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. They're important, particularly the larger the organization you work for, the more complex, the more important, you could argue, you must have a design system to put the needs of your users, the needs of your citizens, the needs of your customers first. Here's one I love. I love the design system that underpins gov.uk. Gov.uk is the website for the UK government. And the government in the UK is much more centralized than here in the US. Basically everything that a state does in the US, central government does in the UK. Motoring, tax, welfare. It's kind of pretty much all of it, apart from emptying the bins done by central government. And gov.uk was a new website launched in 2012. That's cool. But what it really did was turn off 2,500 other websites the central government ran. So the act of doing less, turning things off and replacing them with something that's simple, clear, and fast was a big deal and something I'm very proud of. And if Ben were here too, he'd definitely tell you how proud he was. He's that kind of guy. And it has a design system that underpins it. As you'd expect, a government is a very federated place. Government is literally hundreds of different organizations, agencies, departments that all perceive themselves as quasi-independent and very, very fiercely independent of their neighbor department or their neighbor agency. Such is the way of any large institution, private sector or public sector. They're essentially a collection of warring tribes and helping them have a peace treaty called gov.uk and a single design system was quite an important progression. This is what it looks like. Does all the things you'd expect. It's got components, got patterns, got styles, got templates, blah, 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 blah. All the things. It's got hundreds of contributors. These are the stickers you'll see for designers all over the UK government. They'll be having it very proudly saying, I'm a contributor. I don't have one because I'm not a designer, obviously. And it's been copied all over the world, literally all over the world, in ways sort of, more or less blatant. And I don't want to punch down and be rude to countries. Actually, I do. I'm going to punch down at the Kiwis, because they just plain copied it. literally copied it. Okay, which is cool. They haven't copied it quite so obviously anymore. More usually, you'll find countries or states or Veterans Affairs taking parts and components of the UK's gov.uk design system and reusing them. This is actually a layer of the design system called Notify, which is quite a deep platform layer. It lets you send and receive messages. It's all open source, so Canada's nicked it, Australia's nicked it, Veterans Affairs, Brazil. All cool. It's open source, right? Governments should be borrowing from each other. All good. No problem. All good. We should copy. We should just take what's good work. And then, to be clear, there is hundreds of thousands of hours of really high quality user research that underpins the gov.uk design system. I was really struck by what Liam said about the care you need to take in recruiting people to do user research. Wow, do we take a lot of care in the UK to go to the places that people like I don't go to find the people that need the design system to work for them. So it's a good stuff, and it's good that it's copied, right? Well, I'm not sure. I'm not so sure as I used to be. It's probably a better way of putting it, because you can copy all the templates and the patterns, even the platforms, but there's no guarantee that if you copy those things, you'll actually improve the quality of your services. No guarantee at all. It might look a bit better. You've seen New Zealand. Will you actually improve the experience of a citizen who needs that service to work for them for welfare? Or they've lost their driving license, or their child's been arrested, what do I do now? Those moments where you really need it, just because you've borrowed a design system that's been well researched for one context doesn't mean your services are going to improve. Because a good design system is not made of digital stuff. It's not made of components. It's not made of styles or templates or patterns, however well researched. It's made of people. More specifically, it's made of what's in the heads of the people doing the design. What goes on in the minds, the thoughts of the people doing design. That's what a design system is actually made of. The stuff you see on the design system websites, they're kind of the echoes of what's going on in people's heads. They're not the thing. To explain why, I want to go back more than 10 years now and tell you the story of gov.uk. How did we get to turn off 2,000 pretty rubbish, very expensive websites and replace them with one that was simple, clear, and fast? How did that happen? And in so doing, I hope I'll answer that question, which is, why are design systems made of people? So scroll back, 2009-ish. The UK, which has a nationalised health system, thankfully, had just spent £10 billion on a disastrous IT programme to digitise electronic health records for the sort of 70 million people who live in the UK. £10 billion, you can tell I'm not a designer because I made it big. Okay, it's a big number. Even in dollars, it's a big number. And that's a lot of money to waste on technology that doesn't work. And they threw nearly all of it away. And they wrote it all off in 2009, 2010. I was outside government at the time, absolutely railing against why this happened. And it happened because of this process. This is how design happened in UK government in the 90s and 2000s. You'd have a bunch of very, very clever, very unrepresentative policy people, civil servants, noble people, these are not bad people, thinking up a policy. We need to digitize health records because then it'll be more efficient, our wonderful health service. They make that policy decision, they have lots of meetings, they write very long documents, they chuck it over the wall to another bunch of people, lawyers and procurement experts who write very, very long tender documents that no sane person will ever read, hundreds of pages of detailed requirements, because obviously we can design all this up front, can't we? It's just like a motorway or a submarine, we just designed it all at the start. And then you would chuck it over the wall to one of literally 5 or 6 large system integrators. I'm not going to name them, you know what they're called, who would then charge literally billions and spend years and years delivering those requirements. And then right at the end, you'd chuck it over the wall, and the poor doctors or the poor patients would suffer a calamity because of all the false assumptions baked into those requirements, which turned out in the real world to be a nonsense. No feedback loop, no possibility of feedback loop, no recourse. The best thing about that £10 billion being wasted was that they threw it all away. It's the only good outcome. It would have been much worse if they tried to make it work. So 2009, I definitely had had enough of this. But the really interesting thing, and the reason why it's an important moment was that the politicians realized something was wrong of all flavors. And I've been around the block, and Ben had been around the block long enough to know quite a few of the politicians of all parties. We're not party political, although we are very political. And they'd all had enough. This wasn't working. Whatever their intent behind, improving things, whatever party they were, this process wasn't working for them. They'd had enough. And so there was a moment of being able to go, there is another way. There's another way we could do this. But it's going to need a lot of change. It's not really about websites. It's not really about design systems. It's about what goes on in people's heads inside government. Good people, what goes on in their heads. And so anyway, there's an election in 2010, and the gentleman at the top became a guy called Francis Maude. He's Lord Maude now. Became quite an influential minister, sort of politician within the government. And he asked the lady at the bottom, who's quite a well-known kind of internet person in the UK, called Martha Lane Fox. She's now a dame. Okay, you'll notice I'm neither lord nor dame, but anyway, I'm from Birmingham, and they don't allow you to become lords or dames if you're from Birmingham. But he asked Martha Lane Fox, who'd done a whole load of internet startups and was generally a well-trusted person within government, to review how government did digital technology things. Martha kindly asked me to help her, and we wrote a very, very brief letter that essentially said, do 4 things. Create a new institution of the internet era inside government. Call it the Government Digital Service. Give it absolute control over the user experience of all government digital services. We all know what that means, that phrase. That's an incredible mandate. But the rest of the civil service didn't really understand what user experience was, so they were quite happy to let that one pass. Secondly, start by fixing the websites, because publishing is a complete train crash. You've got 2,500 websites run by central government. The only thing they have in common is that they're all different. It's literally the only thing they have in common. So why don't we have one website and make it quite good and turn all the others off? Thirdly, and the order is quite important here, actually start to fix the services, the welfare, the tax, the motoring, the passports. Get into the service design, because that's really where the value lies. But that's going to take a while. And finally, make it all on APIs, because why wouldn't you? Because you don't know where the world's going. That's what we call go wholesale. So that's literally the report. And the interesting thing was that the government had never had a report that was literally so short. There's something very powerful about it. If you want to impact large organizations, write less, do less, make it memorable. Don't write long things, write short things that get remembered. So that got remembered. And we got started. We said, okay, let's create this new government digital service. I became a civil servant. I hired some people who thought they were designers, developers. Well, they were designers and developers, like me. And I went and found people from the existing civil service who had the right attitude, who put the user first, who understood that there's an interesting approach here. If we worked incrementally, iteratively, humbly, really understood the needs of citizens, then something interesting could happen. Tiny team, that's all you need. You do amazing things with tiny teams. It was literally 3 months, sort of 12 people with a credit card, because, that's what Amazon Web Services needed. Why wouldn't you? And we launched an alpha of what a single government website for the UK should be. We hadn't turned anything off at this point, but we had gone public with an alpha version after 3 months and I think we spent like $200,000, something like that, which is like a rounding error on a rounding error in the world of government. But we went public with it, and that was very important. We went public having a big thing at the top saying, experimental prototype. We want your feedback. We know this is wrong. We made some terrible mistakes with the alpha. It was nowhere near accessible enough, and we got absolutely hammered, to sort of Liam's point about you've got to be vulnerable if you're going to be a good designer. Well, we were definitely feeling vulnerable when we were rightly getting hammered for even not making the alpha accessible was a mistake we should have done. As you can see, it's kind of, it's a website, right? While it kind of was a website built in a very different way from the perspective of government. We didn't start with departments or agencies. We didn't even start with the existing services the government offered. We went back to basics, did the research and said, what are the 100 top needs that citizens have of government? There's obvious things like, I'm going to have a baby, what do I do? Or I need to pay my taxes, or I need welfare, or I've lost my driving license. Some of them were very obvious, and we just ordered them, did the research, and did another thing that was important as well, which was, again, tells you something about the way that large organizations think. It's obvious to anyone who's worked on the web that Google is the homepage, right? It certainly was in 2010, slightly less so now. People start on Google, they don't start on your homepage. Your homepage doesn't matter. If you're a big website, 7% of people will look at your homepage, something like that. They'll all start their journey on Google. So you have to optimize for landing pages. Any commercial organization would do that. Government should do that, surely. Total revelation for government that you should optimize for landing pages around key search terms. Transform the effectiveness of gov.uk. Just by saying if you search for welfare, you'll land on the page about welfare, not one of 50 pages on 2,000 websites about different aspects of welfare. And we made sure we made the language really simple, really clear. We designed the words. I think there's something really important here about not just designing the sort of styles and the layout and the patterns, but design the words. Go through the process of choosing the words so they are as accessible and as understandable and give you the right outcomes as possible. We call that content design rather than editorial or UX writing or whatever. You call it design, designing content. Really important. And then we blogged and tweeted and open sourced it throughout. We literally were blogging every day as a team going, hey, look, this is what we're doing this sprint. Here's a mistake we've made. Here's some designs for the next sprint. Again, really countercultural for government, but signaling to the world that we want to be different. We want your feedback. And we want to hire designers into government because there were very, very few, literally fingers of one hand designers in government out of the sort of 500,000 people. So how do we persuade people to come and join us? Well, show them via blogging that something different is happening. And this is the blog post I wrote. It went really well, by the way. It went really well. The politicians loved it. It made them look all sexy, which they like. And it was pretty good compared to what was there before. It certainly wasn't perfect, but it was a lot better. And it got a lot of energy, a lot of momentum, a lot of goodwill. Even America noticed, that kind of thing. And we got permission and budget to go and do a beta. And this is from the blog post I wrote when we announced that beta, saying we're going to launch the beta in 2 phases in the spring of 2012. And by the way, a third thing, we're going to do a design system. Just like the BBC Global Experience Language. Now, I started my career at the BBC, sort of launching BBC News and BBC Sport Online in the late 90s, and I'd been a senior manager at the BBC in the early 2000s, doing sort of all sorts of web and on-demand stuff. And BBC is just a bunch of feudal warring tribes as well. And so the fact that the BBC, about 3 years before, had managed to launch what they called their GEL, their Global Experience Language, had beguiled me into thinking, we should just go and do that for government, right? You need a design system for government. Of course you need a design system. And this is where Ben steps in and goes, Tom, you're an idiot. Imagine Ben standing there going, Tom, you're an idiot. Ben literally said to me, Tom, you're an idiot. I had hired Ben to lead design in UK government. He took the biggest salary cut of any of us. He'd previously been working at Wyden and Kennedy. But to say to him, come and design a government, played to his ego. But anyway, he said to me, Tom, you're an absolute idiot. Absolute idiot. You cannot launch a design system next spring. This was like August. Simply not going to happen. We need to change how people in government think first. Otherwise, we're just going to give them a bunch of tools for them to do the terrible things again. We have to change their heads. So we're not going to do a design system. We'll do something else different. We'll create some principles, and we'll just publish those. So we worked together and said, okay, what do we believe in? What are our principles? Why don't we just publish those? So in the spring of 2012, we published these 10 principles. I'll let you read them. Motherhood and apple pie, yeah? To you lot. If you're a civil servant in the UK, that is virtually seditious. The fact that you start with the needs of users above the convenience of your department is absolutely sacrilegious. The fact that you would iterate, well, why did you get it wrong the first time? These are very, very radical political concepts. But written in very simple English, so they deliberately became part of the language. And we would very deliberately, it's a sort of good old revolutionary theory, change the language of an organization and you really start to change the soul of that organization. So we deliberately introduced these phrases into the language. We'd say, you should iterate, then iterate again, or what's the user need? Or why don't you just do less? Change the language, start to change the culture, start to change what goes on in people's heads. We did a beta. Here's the first version of the beta. Terrible mistake, which I'm going to confess for the first time ever. It was that bad. This is why I'm not a designer. I had this really great idea. I said, why don't we use the fact that browsers now let us auto-detect people's location, geographic location, and then let the browser detect the location, and then reflect back the Google Earth image of that location. So you're kind of reflecting Britain to itself. Isn't that a great idea? That was live for about 45 minutes before we got some feedback saying, are you mad? Absolutely, looking back, very embarrassing. That was my decision. That's my only design contribution. 45 minutes of terrible privacy-invading nonsense. Luckily, it's a private beta. There's no real harm done. And we went live in October 2012. And what going live meant was quite interesting. We'd actually been running the site as live for about 6 months by this point. And all going live meant was turning the old websites off and redirecting the traffic. So we didn't break any links. We redirected every single URL from those 2,000 websites. All the deep links, not just the home pages. We did like 1.4 million redirects, something like that. So yeah, turned off a whole bunch of rubbish websites. Not very popular amongst many bits of government. Politicians loved it because suddenly you're doing something different and bold that's relatively simple and people are beginning to like it. And yeah, you got a nice website, that's all good. Yeah, 1.8 million redirects created. Lots of big numbers. There's only one number on that slide that really matters, though. And that's the number at the bottom. 1,200 people trained across government. 1,200 people trained to write in a different way, to think in a different way, to start with user needs, to iterate, then iterate again, to think like a designer. Even though these people weren't designers, they were kind of civil servants and policy people and all sorts of different civil servants, but educating them in the process and mindset of design was the really important bit of this process. And we did well. We won Design of the Year with the first government thing ever to win the UK's biggest design award, the first web thing, first digital thing ever to win. Beat the Olympics, that was always good. Fantastic, all good. The Daily Mail called us boring.com. That's my proudest moment. Literally my proudest moment. Was the worst thing the Daily Mail could say about something I did was that it was boring, which I absolutely love that. Because you want your government website to be boring. You really do. You want it to be useful. And then what do? Well, let's go and do those services now. Let's go and do those transactions. Let's go and get to the heart of welfare and tax and motoring and justice and prisons. And to do that, we've got to get out into all sorts of different bits of government and get them working very differently. As Ben says here, we've got to change how people work before we can do any design system stuff, Tom. We have to change how they work. We have to give them a set of tools to be able to use to work differently. And so I break all of my links and all the images go. If there's anything you can do, Alec, that would be helpful. I'll tell you what we did while Alex is fixing the images. We chose 25 of the biggest services the government did, which included welfare, let's have a personal tax service. It included, let's get a digital driving license. So some fairly big changes that you can, throw the internet at when it comes to service design in government, and some big policy implications too. And we said to government, okay, if you want to do this, you want to go on this journey, you have to work our way. You have to start with doing an alpha, start with user needs, start really small, put an empowered multidisciplinary team in there that does the user research. Start humbly, iterate, go through an alpha process, do a beta, make it a private beta, then a public beta, and then after a period of time, go live and never stop iterating. This isn't a project, you're not funding a project, you're funding a new way of working forever to continually improve 25 of the biggest services that government has got. And, that was a lot of work. A lot of work to do that, a lot of political cat herding, a lot of microaggressions and macroaggressions from people who you're challenging, their way of working, right at the heart of the tax department or the welfare department. And that, in many ways, is the work. I mean, Liam mentioned this earlier. If you want to make a difference, you sometimes got to have some really uncomfortable conversations that say, I'm sorry, we're going to do this differently. I know you've worked this way for the last 50 years, but we're going to do this differently. We'll just try it. We'll just try it. You're not alone. There's 24 other bits of government going on the journey together with you. And we're going to spend 2 years, 400 days we're going to spend doing this. And we're going to see, we're going to get to the point where 25 other services are live in a newly redesigned state, having worked the same way. And what you can't see on screen is we wrote a manual. We didn't do a design system. We wrote a manual. We said, okay, how should you work? What kind of people should you have on your team? What should an alpha version of something try and test for? What assumptions should you be testing for? How do you make it secure in a government context? The ways of working were described in great detail. And there's one thing that civil servants love. It's a set of rules. So we basically rewrote all the rules about how they should work in very clear terms. And civil servants also love standards. So we wrote a standard. We called it a service standard. And what was interesting about that service standard was it didn't say it should look like this, the website. It said you should work like this. The standard was about how teams were working. Are you doing user research at least every fortnight? Are your senior leaders themselves observing user research at least every 6 weeks? Because scientifically that's been proven to improve the outcomes. Have you got the right mixture of skills on your team? Have you got frontline operational people who really understand the needs of citizens, who sit on the phone all day? Are they on your team? As well as the designers and the developers and the product managers, etc. Changing how people worked was what followed changing how people thought. Now, hopefully, I might have some pictures back now. We've got to fix. Okay, so I'll throw some numbers at you. 2 years, suddenly you've got about 2,000 people across government working differently. Yay, here we go. All good, go for that, go full screen. That's all good. So there you have it, a design manual with a standard. All about the how, not the what. This diagram I must have shown to about 10,000 civil servants. I literally said, don't work like that, work like this. Literally Duplo level design, which is kind of, and giving them a new language. It doesn't matter what an alpha or beta is, it just means you can just start small, iterate, basically. Very radical idea in government to never stop iterating. There's this problem in large organizations where things are projects and projects start and projects end. If you want to be seditious and radical as a designer, challenge the notion of there being projects. Fund teams, not projects. So, here are the 25 different services going through their different phases. Some went better than others, some were total car crashes, many of them were very successful. Different bits of government all over the UK. We did digitize your driving license. So we get rid of a whole bunch of paper driving licenses. We did get welfare. This is a welfare for if you cared for someone full time. We did prison visits. If you want to visit someone in prison, let's make that easy for you because you get great outcomes if you increase the number of people visiting prisoners. Fantastic outcomes. That was a great team working on that. They're still working on it today. Register to vote. Quite a big deal, registering to vote. When you think about power and the conversation Liam had with you, I was absolutely insistent, Ben and I, we were going to redo register to vote, come what may. So important. Registering to vote had been done by 440 local authorities in the UK. Every local council did its own registration to vote. We said we need one website, and we'll get 3 million more people if we just make it simple. Okay, there's only 70 million in the UK. We're kind of a couple of Californias in terms of scale. So 3 million is quite a lot, and sure enough, changed the result of the election, according to the BBC. For good or for ill, but you get 3 million more people to vote because you make a website simple, and then you're going to make a difference. That's the number that the Treasury cared about. We saved £4.1 billion. That tells you how much money those system integrators were making. because the technology is simple, really. Technology scales really well, gets cheaper and simpler every year to do kind of government services. If you get the right small team with the right mindset and the right capabilities and skills and humility, you can literally save billions. The same is true in the US, in spades today. You can literally have your cake and eat it. You can make stuff better for citizens and save billions. And we went from number 10 to number 1 in the United Nations e-government rankings. That's the most United Nations phrase ever, e-government. Anyway, it's always good to be number 1. Very happy ministers. We're number 1 in the world for digital government. Again, the bar's pretty low, but whatever. And Harvard Kennedy School came calling, and we did case studies. And we got a lovely letter from Obama in 2015 thanking us, because we sort of inspired and helped a whole bunch of other countries set up their digital services, Canada and the US. So we got a nice letter from Obama saying thank you for your help in setting up the US digital service. All good. Can only do all this, however, if you go back to Ben's initial comment. Change how people think across the whole organization. This is a poster in the window of our office in London, which Ben created, which when you walked in, you couldn't avoid but see it. And all it had was a little hole outside looking down onto the corner of a busy street in London going, we're doing it for them. That's why we joined government. They're the people we're serving, not our own departments or our own needs. It's for them. It took us 5 years to get ready to need a design system such that it would actually be valuable, to change how people thought, to change how people worked. And actually, we'd left by the time that the designers all over government, by which point there were literally hundreds of designers in governments, they kind of went, we left in 2016, they kind of went, we should probably have a design system, yeah? Because we're all kind of just starting to do it ourselves in different departments. Why don't we have a design system? It's like, yes. And they wrote a fantastic blog post going, we just had this meeting, and we've decided as like hundreds of designers across the UK government, we need a federated design system. Federated. Not a centralized design system, a federated one that any designer can contribute to from across government. Owned collectively by everyone who does design in the UK government, not a central team. That's what it looks like. Does all the things. Here's why I think it's great. It emerged from practice. This was not some super genius designer going, I know what good looks like. This was tens of thousands of mistakes being revealed in user research and data. So that template comes from so many accreted mistakes being fixed, literally tens of thousands. Good design systems emerge from practice. They evolve and accrete, they're not created. Little example. This is an amazing woman called Margaret Calvert, who designed the road signs in the UK in the 60s, I think, early 60s. She designed that font. It's called Transport. Instantly recognizable. Every road sign in the UK has a very, very carefully legible. She designed it so you could read it while you're driving at 70 miles an hour. We were like, we need our stuff to be super legible. Why don't we get Margaret to design us a font for the website? So she did a version of Transport called GDS Transport, specifically for screens, specifically to be super legible, super accessible. And it has the advantage of she only licensed it to government. Only government can use that font. So if anyone tries to rip you off doing a phishing site, you can just take them down straight away through copyright infringement, which is a little hack. But anyway, good stuff. We did all sorts of components, all the obvious things. How do you do a date input? How do you do an upload? Again, we're designing the words, not just what it looks like. The words are almost the most important part of the design process. What words do we use to describe upload a file? And then increasingly, you'll get whole patterns appearing over time in the design system. So here's one for bank account. Dead simple, right? Everyone could do a bank account. Well, if you're nearly excluded from the financial system, it's not really obvious how you do a bank account. There are literally hundreds of user research sessions into getting that design pattern right to serve not people like us, but people that we never meet who really need that to work for them. They're constantly improving a good design system, and gov.uk is constantly improving. So this is at the bottom of the page about bank details. Go to GitHub, have a look at the conversation on GitHub. Every design pattern has a conversation going on live constantly, and there's like 22 people talking about, okay, I'm trying this little tweak to the design pattern. How do we make it better? How do we keep the conversation going? We don't ossify, don't make a fossil. Easy to start using. What if you're a new designer, the first designer in a small new bit of government? How do you start using this stuff? Well, this is a big button on the front page. We're designed for the needs of the designer who's never used it before, who's never going to be able to come to the central team and get some help. And make prototyping super easy. One of the things the team did brilliantly was create a really great, simple prototyping kit. So you can, during COVID, they were like bashing out prototypes and going downstairs with their masks on into the street, literally to do prototyping in the street to launch a service. That evening, they would do user research using a prototyping kit in the morning on the street below, just before lockdown. Amazing stuff with prototyping kits. And Ben's got something to say here, and he would say this more rudely than I'm able to convey, which is Figma's great. He wouldn't say that, he hates Figma. A good prototyping toolkit is both quick and for real. There's something that unnerves me slightly about how Figma has become the proxy for a real prototype. I'm a little bit cautious about Figma. Ben's very, very cautious about Figma. And it's a community. A design system is, in and of itself, a community. It is the only sustainable design system you can have is one that's owned by designers across your whole organization. Every designer, wherever they are, they must feel that they can contribute, that they have some shared ownership. It's a genuinely federated act. And, there's a big community section. There's a Slack channel I can't show you because I'm not a designer, so NFI. But that's where it all happens. Obviously, it all happens on Slack. But, it's quite tough contribution criteria to get in. The standards are high, and if you manage to get your contribution in, your peers and your community go, ooh, we've got something in the design system, cool. Genuine, supportive community. They have a backlog, as you'd imagine. And if you go back to this again, they chose the third option, multiple teams building and sharing a collection of design assets together. And there's a real sense of togetherness amongst those designers, even though they work in hundreds of different bits of government, different agencies and departments. But a lesson learned here the hard way is that's really good, but you also need a dedicated team. You need that central team. That team is there to enable other designers. They are not design heroes. Be the last people to describe themselves as the top of any tree. And if you go to there, you have to fund that as an organization, fund teams, not projects. And any design system project, if you're involved in a design system project, that word tells me you're creating a fossil. Almost by the moment you launch it, you've created a fossil. Unless your organization is committed to funding a team, you're not going to have a design system, you'll have a design fossil. So this is that central team. They will hate the fact I've shown this photo. I can't tell you how much they'll hate that. I wouldn't do it in the UK because they'd find out, but I don't think they'll find out here. Because they're the most egoless, wonderful, supportive. They'd be telling you all about the people, the designers they work with all over government who actually do the work as far as they see it, and they're right to a degree. This is their own backlog, the central team. And I just want to, I looked at this last night and thought, what are they working on at the moment? I mean, I've left government like 6 years, I've been out ages. It just tells me this is a really cool team. Look at this, though. Look at the backlog on the right there. They are, linking to the Scala implementation of gov.uk front end. That's some software developer geek stuff that's important. Look at the one beneath. Complete hide this page research sessions with people with a lived experience of domestic violence. So they're doing some work on what do we do if you're looking at the page that says, how do I get divorced? And your abusive partner comes in, you need to hide that page. That stuff's for real. I love the fact they're still doing that, and they're doing it all in the open. You can go and look at this, you can go and comment on it. And I'm going to really, really embarrass two individuals in particular, and they will both hate me for this, but it's important, because I think their style of design leadership tells us a lot about what it takes to have a design system that lives in people's hearts and minds, not just as assets on a page. There's Amy, who's all about the words. How do we design the words so they're understood and they're acted upon appropriately? And Tim, who's the most egoless, wonderful, supportive designer leader I've ever worked with, who all his role is to help other people across government. That's the kind of leadership you need. To end, 3 risks to manage. 3 lessons learned. Dogma, oh my word, dogma sets in so quickly. People loved it. Well, it says this in the design system. Must be like this. Oh, horrible example. One of the realizations that from literally tens of thousands of user research sessions in government was that the right way to start thinking about service design is to ask one question per page. Start by asking one question per page. Don't do a page full of questions. Start by, crucial word there, start by asking one. Then do your research yourself. Work out where you can group questions together, where it makes sense for the user. But don't start with a long list of questions on a page. Start with one question per page. Almost overnight, that became dogma. You can only have one question per page. Can't do that. Lots of finger wagging. So watch the dogma. You've got to choose your language really carefully and catch the dogma, which they've now done. They've done a good job. Big realization. Most design is not done by designers. If your design system thinks that all that design is done by designers, you're going to miss some big problems and big opportunities. And I just want to highlight one, which is that register to vote service. When we discovered it in sort of 2013, it was a policy team thinking about how they could make what they called individual electoral registration simpler. And they were going to call the service individual electoral registration. They didn't know what they were doing, whether that's what a civil servant would call registering to vote, surely. We managed to persuade them and say, what would you tell your brother or your sister or your aunt you were working on? Oh, I'd tell them I was registering to vote. Well, then let's call it register to vote. And if we hadn't called it register to vote, I can guarantee Google wouldn't have put it on their homepage for the week before the election. They wouldn't have put individual electoral registration, because that drove a lot of those 3 million people. And you wouldn't have people graffitiing by train stations in London saying register to vote. So a lot of design is not done by designers. Don't forget that. Your job is to proselytize to everybody about design, not just talk to your designer mates. I say that as not a designer. Get one of those in your building by the door. Every time anyone comes in who's not a designer, stop them there and go, we're doing it for them. That's the kind of mindset you need. And then finally, beware of making a faster horse. Faster horse is what allegedly Henry Ford said, that if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they'd have told me a faster horse. He never said that. Someone made it up about 15 years ago. It's completely nonsense. But anyway, I think there's something interesting here, which is if you have a really mature design system, it's really easy to bash out an improved version of an existing service design really quickly, and it will be better. And in fact, you could simplify an existing service design quite radically, potentially. But the danger is, unless you really think, you might miss the real step change possibility. And I'm going to praise some Canadians now, because I love Canadians. I'm actually going to praise some people from the edge of Canada, which is Nova Scotia. We've done quite a bit of work with Nova Scotia over the last years. And the fact they'd never told anyone they'd done this tells you all you need to know about Nova Scotians. Okay? They have a very wise law in Nova Scotia that says you can only have a barbecue or a bonfire when it's safe to do so, because they have such wildfire problems. And the way that service used to work was you literally had to go to a little booth and get a license. You'd pay your sort of $2 Canadian, which is about 12 cents, and get a license to have a bonfire or a barbecue. They had a new minister about 10 years ago who said, why don't we digitize this? And they were all set to go, yeah, let's go and digitize it. Let's have a flow, so you can get your license online. When this guy here, Scott, I absolutely love Scott, went, why? He wasn't a designer. He's just a civil servant with a brain. Went, Canadians are the most obedient people in the world, okay? Why don't we just publish a map with like color-coded on the web to say, yeah, you can have a bonfire here, you can't have one here, and then put a phone number in the incredibly unlikely event that someone breaks those rules, and then get rid of the licenses completely. Let's not have licenses, let's just have a map on the web. Amazing. Bit of design, not by a designer. And I think if you'd had a design system in Nova Scotia, I'm not sure you'd have done that. So always think about the faster horse. Right, I really am nearly done now. It's made of people. Design systems are made of people. Actually, a phrase I stole from a designer at the Cooperative Group, which is a big collection of food shops in the UK, a guy called Matt Tyus, who's changed the name of his design system to be the Experience Library, just because it's less exclusionary to those who don't see themselves as designers. That's the kind of mindset you need. So to end, This is some of my colleagues working with the California government, doing some fantastic work, working with some amazing people. And I want to tell you, do stuff that matters, do stuff that really matters. And if you get a chance to work in government, do it. You don't have to do it forever. In fact, I'd advise you to do 5 years, or that burnout thing that Nola talked about will happen. But do give it a go, because it's the most amazing work. And I just want to promote this. This is New York City. They don't pay me any money. New York City are hiring designers. This is literally, I took the screen grab last night, which is probably why all the pictures broke. Sorry, Alec, because I made him put this in. So go and work in government if you get a chance. It's amazing. You can change the lives of millions of people and get paid just enough to survive in some cases. Thank you very much.